Observer Research Foundation, ORF, 10th of February 2023, in a vicious loop to control the Himalayan heights, India and China. While building its navy to challenge India in the Indian Ocean, China intends to keep India busy along its northern frontier. The Doklam crisis in 2017 marked a turning point in the increased war preparations along the 4,000 km line of actual control, LAC, which marks the Sino-Indian border. In the 3 years leading up to 2020, China increased the number of its air bases, air defense installations, and heliports along the Indian border by a factor of 2. This, in turn, resulted from India's intensified push for infrastructure development in the Himalayas following the conflict in Depsang in 2013. The term security dilemma refers to a situation in which country A feels danger from nation B and starts to strengthen its defenses. The vicious cycle that nation A and nation B are currently in may boost their capabilities but may compromise their security and raise the likelihood of war. Nevertheless, country B starts to feel exposed and ups its military power when it does so. In India, the events of 2020 were unexpected. Chinese blockades at several locations along the LAC in eastern Ladakh and the conflict on the Galwan River prompted an Indian response that saw the buildup of forces and equipment along the LAC. Both sides deployed 50,000 to 60,000 more soldiers and equipment close to the LAC in Ladakh. Unexpectedly, one of the 3 strike corps facing Pakistan had to be immediately reoriented to concentrate on China. To close a hole in the central sector, it also reoriented one of its divisions in Dehradun northward. Army Commander General Manoj Banda stated that the situation along the LAC was mainly calm during the annual news conference held on the eve of Army Day in January. He declared, "We have an equal number of troops on our side. The number of Chinese forces opposing our Eastern Command has increased slightly, but we are keeping a close eye on things." He observed that the army had extremely high standards for preparation. "In each of our sectors, we have sufficient forces and reserves to be able to properly deal with any situation," he stated. The asymmetry of the two countries' geography must be considered in any discussion of military readiness along the LAC. This accentuates the logistical difficulties for both sides. India must deal with road development in the delicate Himalayas, while China must deal with a high plateau far from its heartland. Corps have a strength of roughly 60,000, divisions about 16,000, and companies about 5,000. The Chinese have been deploying their forces under a single theater command since about 2015, which puts them far ahead of India in terms of organization. The Indian side has yet to begin its planned construction of theater commands and integrated combat groups, but they have now reorganized their forces into smaller combined arms brigades. In contrast to the divisions and corps of the past, armies today field smaller, more mobile formations due to the all-pervasive surveillance and precision attack capabilities. India and China fought a war in 1962 and had a few smaller-scale clashes in 1967, 1987, and 2020. From the unthinkable, a nuclear exchange, to a limited war a la 1962 or a skirmish of the Galwan style, a Sino-Indian confrontation may take many different forms. Although China is quickly modernizing its nuclear forces, there is no evidence to suggest that it would consider any scenario in which it could face off against India's nuclear weapons capability, no matter how tiny. Both sides have sizable atomic capabilities. Officially, only 2 of the 8 nuclear-armed nations that have declared their possession of such weapons have agreed to the no first use, and a few, principle, both sides. Hence, it stands to reason that any future conflict would be a skirmish. Nevertheless, given the size and capability of the troops being raised, this might range from a bit of competition like Galwan to a more significant conflict like the India-Pakistan conflict in Kargil in 1999. The Chinese surprised us in 2020 and took over a lot of locations in eastern Ladakh. Yet ever since, the army has been ready for everything. It has kept a balancing force in Ladakh to thwart any Chinese attack, and it recently defeated a significant Chinese attempt to overwhelm Indian troops in Yangtze, close to Taong. Chinese military doctrine as of 2015 urges readiness for combat and winning informationized local warfare. It took note of the tendencies in modern action toward the creation and application of intelligent, unmanned, and long-range precision weapons and equipment. Strategic rivalry now occurs at commanding heights in space and the cyber domain. The People's Liberation Army (PLA) of China would therefore pursue information domination, precise strikes on strategic points, and undertake combined operations to succeed. Nuclear threat. Hence, the battle we need to prepare for is like the one in Ukraine, in which the Chinese attacked Indian sites through attrition using their superior logistical, artillery, and missile capabilities. We also need to be ready for the possibility that Indian command and control centers and logistical hubs might be targeted throughout northern India, from the northeast through Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, Jammu and Kashmir, and Ladakh. It will be difficult to establish reliable supply lines, given the asymmetry of the terrain. Roads in the delicate Himalayas can be readily breached, but on Tibet's level plateau, it is more difficult for India to interfere with Chinese supplies. India currently enjoys a slight advantage over the People's Liberation Army Air Force thanks to its Air Force, housed in several facilities stretched out from Assam to Ladakh, PLF. To counter India's advantage, the Chinese are making great efforts to establish their network of air bases, heliports, and surface-to-air missile systems. India must also ensure it has the resources to fend off Chinese hacking and attempts to destroy our satellites. The US has been a massive help to Ukraine in dealing with Russian cyber and space capabilities. Microsoft and Apple have aided on the technological front, while Elon Musk's Starlink technology has allowed the Ukrainian soldiers to keep in touch. Chinese workers. The border with India, along with a portion of Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, and Bhutan, falls under China's Western Theater Command, WTC, which has its administrative headquarters in Chengdu. The Xinjiang Military District, MMD, and the Tibet Military District, TMD, are its two major divisions, XMD. Although the XMD's forces battle India in Ladakh, the TMD's territory extends along Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim, Uttarakhand, and Himachal Pradesh. According to sources, the Chinese are also working to operationalize 3 new medium combined arms brigades that would serve under the TMD. The PLF has also reportedly started building 2 new dual-use airports near where the Indian Army chief mentioned a slight increase in troops. The Belfer Center at Harvard estimates about 40,000 Chinese workers in the TMD. They have the 52nd and 53rd Mountain Brigades in addition to the 54th Mechanized Infantry Brigade in Lhasa, the 308th Independent Artillery Brigade, and the 651st Independent Air Defense Artillery Brigade, which are equal to our Indo-Tibetan Border Police's 7 border defense regiments. Moreover, there are 3 separate battalions. North of Sikkim, a new brigade has now been established. Over the next 2 years, independent companies will likely be at the center of 2 combined weapons brigades. The XMD has a large area of duty. Still, typically 2 of its formations, the 6th Mechanized Infantry Division and the 4th Motorized Infantry Division, each with 13,000 soldiers, along with support formations for artillery, air defense, and other duties, are in charge of Ladakh. The conventional forces that India is up against only have these minimal numbers. Chinese papers claim that the WTC has upgraded its equipment significantly over the past 2 years, particularly in the forces facing India. With Type 15 light tanks and ZTZ-99A major battle tanks, new vehicle-mounted 155mm howitzers have also been developed. They will be swapped out for the more modern Type 96B 40-ton tanks. The forces have also reorganized into combined arms brigades and battalions. Before the most recent changes, the quality of mechanization was nearly the same as that of the Indian Army, and the quantity of mechanization was roughly the same, according to the Chinese. Nonetheless, they have recently increased mechanization by reducing their heavier tanks and increasing wheeled assault vehicles. They have expanded their personnel as well as their artillery and air defense equipment. Various factors increase their lethality. For instance, the Chinese are constructing underground facilities in several locations, including Lhasa, Gyeongsi, and Shannan counties, to house tactical and battlefield support missiles that will be used to attack Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh. These facilities will also house new long-range surface-to-air missiles. Air Force. The PLF is the focal point of the Chinese preparations. The buildup of air power on China's western frontier is sweeping in size, according to a research from the Center for International and Strategic Studies in Washington, D.C. In Tibet and Xinjiang, the survey found 37 airports and heliports that had been freshly constructed or improved since 2017. The construction pace sped up dramatically in 2020, with 22 of these being classified as military or dual purpose. The construction of heliports near the Lak over its entire length, from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh, is also notable. The PLA can maneuver more quickly in mountainous places because of these facilities. The PLF is developing brand new air bases at new airfields that are growing in Tingri, north of Nepal, and Shannan, which will house another 120 MRCA, in addition to enhancing their capabilities at existing airports like Lhasa Gangar, Shigatsa, Gargunsa, and Chomdobangda, which house about 60 multi-role capability aircraft, MRCA. The fact that the HHQ-9 long-range surface-to-air missiles are co-located with all the sites and that all of them will have new hardened shelters for planes and uncrewed aerial vehicles shows that the PLA is concerned about India's BrahMos missiles. Chinese aircraft operating from the high Tibetan Plateau suffer a weight penalty and are limited in their ability to carry a full battle load. In addition, as they take off, Indian radar sensors high in the Himalayas detect them. Indian combatants can be found in the eastern cities of Tezpur, Misumari, Jorhat, Hoshiarpur, and Bagdogra, and mainly in the western plains. They can board full war cargoes and suddenly appear over the Himalayas to launch an attack. Dominance contest. Ultimately, the Chinese plan to defend the west and attack in the east, Taiwan. India's posture is primarily defensive, but the army does prepare for local offensives because, like China, it has no claims on Tibet other than to reclaim Aksai Chin. This would imply that there is little chance of a more severe border conflict. Yet, the Chinese are still adamant about keeping control of the western sector. In response to Indian efforts to catch up, they have increased their capabilities and kept up Lak exploration. India maintains about 225,000 troops close to the Lak due to the logistical issues caused by the terrain. The extensive WTC area has seen a thinner and more dispersed Chinese deployment. Yet, the Chinese have built long-term infrastructure to garrison troops closer to the Lak in recent years. This is particularly true of the eastern Ladakh region located across from the new Indian road that connects Darbug Shyok Dol at Begoldi. The Chinese see Indian deployments in this region as a danger to Xinjiang and their road in Aksai Chin. India needs to let the Chinese know that its foreign strategy, which includes more significant ties with the US, is unlikely to change due to the border events. Moreover, the construction of border infrastructure would not stop in New Delhi. India can now observe significant Chinese military deployments in the Spangir Tso region thanks to its strong response and occupation of the Kailash Range on the south bank of the Pangong Tso. A Chinese attempt to physically overwhelm Indian troops that were facing them on a strategically placed ridge in the east at Yangtze near Taong was successfully repelled by Indian forces. Two striking formations, 1 Corps and 17 Corps, whose purpose is to carry the battle into Tibet in the case of war, are now present in the revised deployments along the Lak. With these actions, India has demonstrated a willingness to adopt a more forceful stance toward border management.